I am a citizen. I am an escapee. I am an exception. I am returning to Trench. I am Clancy. It was these words which ushered us into a new era, which would become known as the Clancy Era, for an album which was released a year ago. Hello, and welcome to the 1-year anniversary celebration of the album Clancy. As many of you mentioned when I first sent out the announcement for this, it's hard to believe it has already been a year. And yet here we are a year later, and already a new album is on the way. And the anniversary of this old album is somewhat overshadowed by that fact. Thank you for tuning in and joining for this video. It will be somewhat longer than is my norm, so I hope you stick around and enjoy the entirety of it. I have a number of different things planned, a number of different elements of this era, which I would like to discuss. But before launching into any of that, I think it is worthwhile to look back at the beginnings of this era, to remember how it first started. Obviously, there were those letters which first began circulating, and in many ways, those marked the beginning of this era. But this era didn't officially start until the I Am Clancy video was released, and we were given a full recap of the lore up until this point, so we could establish exactly where we stood before launching into the beginning of the end of the story, which is what Clancy really was. Now that we know that this new album, Breach, is on the way, we can really see Clancy for what it was, which is a character study of the person of Clancy, who that character is, and the significance which he has for the story. And we have been following his character all along, ever since the first letters came out at the beginning of the Trench era. But in many ways, we didn't quite realize that that is who we were following. And we also didn't exactly have an in-depth look at him and his motivations, which is what we got in this album. So it was the I Am Clancy video which launched us into the beginning of the story. And then that was quickly followed by the single and the video for Overcompensate. And Overcompensate was significant for a number of reasons, not just because of the story it tells and the place it has in the lore, but also because it signified what this sound was going to be for this album, which was a departure from the sound which they had introduced in Scaled and Icy, sort of a return back to the sound which they had had previously, but certainly had a unique sound in and of itself, a sound which characterized the entirety of that album, and also kind of played an influence in the arrangement of the songs which they played during the Clancy tour. That song was followed up by Next Semester, which sort of reinforced the sound that Overcompensate had been hinting at, and also did a lot more to explain the significance of the car, which had been constantly reappearing throughout the story, but which no one had ever been able to fully place within the story or give a significant meaning to. But Overcompensate and Next Semester weren't alone. These were then followed by 12 additional songs and 12 additional music videos, for a total of 14 music videos, one for each song off of the album, something which is not only unprecedented for 21 Pilots, but really is not common for any band. And the final music video which they released was the music video for Paladin Straight, which took a long time coming, a suspiciously long time coming. So long, in fact, that a number of people got together and began trying to look for clues among the digital remains, which was a digital exclusive version of the album. Eventually, the music video was found, but not before a somewhat strange and cryptic teaser for the video was uncovered, which contained a good amount of redacted video footage, with this sign in front of it: DEMA.org, restricted content. But then the video was released, and the video which everyone thought was going to conclude the story of Trench and DEMA did not. Instead, it left us with a cliffhanger, and left us all wondering what would be coming next. Before I move on, I think it is worthwhile to take a moment to talk about this Digital Remains album. It's one which was only available for purchase and download on the site for, I think, a number of hours, maybe 48 or 36 hours, something like that, a handful of days. And within its pages are a number of exclusive images with some weird cryptic writing on some of them, and generally just a bunch of other art from the Clancy era and the album branding and styling in general. But it's one which often gets overlooked and pushed to the side, even though it is quite an extensive collection of images, artwork, and different alternate lyrics and clues, really. Clues which don't necessarily point to anything specific that we can acknowledge right now, but which likely will be revealed to contain a lot more information than we originally thought. And it certainly is among these pages that ideas like the double album theory were given further fuel. Pages like this, which read Clancy Ultimus Capitilius 25, Clancy the Ultimate Chapter 25, which now, retrospectively, seems to be pointing towards the release of the album Breach in the year 2025. But even after all of this, the era did not end there. Not only was there the launch of the Clancy Tour, but there was a good deal of other interesting pieces of media that were released, one of which was a book entitled The Only Band in the World, which you can see sitting there behind me, by Ryan Bird, a collection of interviews and conversations with 21 Pilots. There was also the release of a single, which was featured on Netflix's series Arcane Season 2, which is obviously The Line. And this was interesting, not only because it was a brand new 21 Pilots song so soon after a full-length album, but also because it was the first time in something like 8 years that they had written a song for a show or a movie. The last time being the song Heathens in 2016 for the movie Suicide Squad. The song came out and quickly became very popular, not just among fans of 21 Pilots, but also among fans of the show Arcane and gamers in general as well. Largely, this was due to the fact that a performance of The Line was delivered by the band at the Game Awards, a performance which sort of went viral for a couple of days there and was discussed among a number of fairly large streamers, further fueling the success and popularity of the song. And then, of course, as part of the Clancy Tour, there was the fan premiere exhibit, something which I never attended myself, but which has been of great interest and significance to me, and which has very much caught my attention because of the various letters which were released as part of these exhibits. Letters written between the banditos or citizens of Dima, and then also, of course, between the Torchbearer and Clancy himself. And besides the fact that these letters, and really all the letters which they've released, are significant because they contain more information about the world and about the lore, they're also very interesting because they did a lot to help the world building of Trench, because they're written between sort of nobodies in the story. These characters and letters do not play a significant role in the story, but instead they serve to outline and give a voice to just ordinary citizens, going about their daily lives inside the world of Trench in the city of Dima. Obviously, these daily lives are broken up and interrupted by the conflict which is happening around them, in which many of them are participating. But it certainly is a more down-to-earth look at the context in which this story is happening, and very interesting and significant for those reasons. And in addition to all of this, the Clancy Era was full of a number of merchandise items which they released. Now, I don't generally collect merchandise broadly speaking. I don't have many t-shirts or hoodies from my favorite bands. But what I do like to collect, as I'm sure many of you have noticed either looking behind me in my videos or through conversations I've had with you on YouTube, is I'm a big fan and collector of physical media. And the Clancy Era was not lacking in that regard. Not only were there a number of different vinyl variations, some of which are displayed behind me here, and of course just the release of a physical CD, so you can see back there, there were also cassette tapes for sale. And I picked myself up one of these. As you can see, it's still in the plastic shrink wrap, mainly because I don't actually have a cassette player right now, so there isn't much point in opening it if I can't play it, but also because in the past, when they've released cassette tapes for Blurryface and Trench in a very limited supply, as they did for Clancy, they have over time become very expensive, sometimes costing hundreds, I don't think quite thousands, but certainly very high hundreds of dollars. So perhaps it is worthwhile to leave this in its plastic wrap, completely unsealed. But nonetheless, it is a very cool piece of merchandise to have because not a lot of bands even release music on physical media anymore anyway, but even when they do, it's more often vinyls and CDs because most people don't really have a way to play these. And I don't either, but it's still a cool collectible item to have. And the other piece of physical media, which I think is my favorite that they released for Clancy, was of course his journal. Not only is this a really cool way to release a CD, as you can see it's included in here, but it also is just really helpful to have the entire collection of Clancy's letters and journal entries all in one place, at least up until the point at which Clancy was released. Certainly we have some more letters from him, and hopefully we'll get even more. So perhaps they will release a follow-up journal, but I hope if they do that, it certainly has a significant amount of new letters within it. But it also, besides being a really nice decorative piece to have, it also has been practical as I work on different theories and videos for myself just to have everything compiled in one place. And a lot easier to read than trying to read it off of a computer screen as well. But underlying all of this, all of these music videos and cryptic clues and letters and merchandise items, is of course the album and the songs themselves contained within the album, the music of Clancy. Not long after the album Clancy came out, a year ago now, I did a full album review of that body of work, including a breakdown by song. But that was a while ago now, and it was very soon after the album itself had come out, so I hadn't really had time to fully process or unpack the album in its fullness. Now, a year later, I am sure some of my opinions and takes on this album have changed, so I thought it would be worthwhile to go through and give a new ranking of the album in its entirety. Now, before we start actually ranking these, 2 points of clarification need to be made. One, because there are so few songs in this ranking, in this tier list, there are only 14 because it's just one album that we're looking at. I only want there to be one song in the S tier at the end. One song which is, in my estimation, the best song or my favorite song off of Clancy. And then the second point of clarification is because of that, because we are just looking at one album and only one song is going to make it into the S tier, there will be some songs which will be in the B, C, or even D tiers. And that's not because, in my estimation, these songs are bad songs, but when taking a look at these 14 songs and ranking them from my favorite to my least favorite, something is going to have to end up as my least favorite, naturally speaking. But with those disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. Let's look at these songs, starting with Overcompensate. To start off, I'm going to put this in an A tier. It is one of my favorites off of the album. It's very well done. I'm particularly fond of the way in which it opens, bringing back those lines and the melody from the song Bandito. And obviously, it works perfectly as an introduction to the album Clancy, setting the tone, as I mentioned a moment ago, setting the tone and the sound which this album and this era were ushering in. It's not quite S tier, at least not yet, perhaps when taken in consideration with everything else. Eventually, I will move it up there. There are a couple of minor points which I take issue with in the sound of the song, and some of the lyricism, while very good, is not always my favorite. But overall, this is a very good song. Next up, Next Semester. I'm going to start off with this in a B, but I may move it higher. I do very much like this song. Not as much as Overcompensate, and I do find bits of it a little repetitive, but the melody in it is very, very good. And I also really like the bridge of this song, which interestingly is not in the official lyrical booklet for the album. I think online, obviously, you can find those lyrics for that bridge, but for some reason they just aren't officially released in the physical releases, the CD or the vinyl. But I do really like the lyricism in this one, especially, like I mentioned, in that bridge and towards kind of the second half of the song. I think it's my favorite. Not because the song is coming to an end at last, but just where Tyler took that song throughout as it progresses into that second half. I really like with that bridge and then the slowed down bit as well. Backslide, a C. I think of the four which were released, the 4 songs which were released before the album as a whole was published, Backslide was my least favorite. Now, it has grown on me quite a lot. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if I move this up a bit higher later on. But to start, this will have to go down in a C. The lyricism is good. The melody is not bad. The way the melody works in the chorus always just kind of hits my ear a little strangely. The more I listen to it, the more I realize it's not actually bad. It just isn't quite a method of delivering that melody, which I particularly enjoy. The pacing and the tempo of it aren't quite my favorite either with that one, but some parts of it are really well done. It's just not one of my favorite songs off of the album. The Craving single version, that was the 4th one that they released. I think I'll put it just above Backslide for now. Yeah, actually, I'll put it there. I'll put it in at the bottom of the B. I do really like it. It sounds like a single. At the time the album came out, and we'll get into this more in a moment when we look at Jenna's version, I really thought that they should have released the single version on the album and had Jenna's version be the alternate version that was released separate from the album. And I still might be inclined to agree with that, but the more that I've listened to these songs, the more I've recognized that the single version really does sound like it's a single more than an album track. I'm not sure I can fully explain what I mean by that. It's just something in the melody and the production, I think, of that song. So I think they made the right decision in the end. Now, that's not to say I don't think Jenna's version should be improved upon, but again, we'll get into that in a moment when we get to that song. So I think low B is fine for this one. Things, obviously will be moving around as we include more songs, but I do like it. I think it's, there's always a song on these albums ever since Blurryface, which he has included for Jenna. And I think this is lyrically my favorite. Formidable was good, and Smithereens was good as well. But there's something about the lyricism and the message of The Craving that I found to be more relatable, a bit of a deeper song when it came to writing a song for Jenna. Not that the other songs were shallow per se, but I think if you look from Tear in My Heart all the way up to The Craving, you can see a natural progression in depth and maturity in how these songs are written and how they focus on different, aspects and elements of his relationship with Jenna. And that's something I've appreciated kind of watching. And so I think I might like Smithereens more than Formidable, perhaps. But generally speaking, my appreciation and my like of these songs for Jenna has grown over time with each new one. So if there is one on Breach, that would be cool. I'd be curious to see how that one is. But I also wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't one included on that album, just given the nature of what that album is and the story that it's supposed to be telling, at least from what we can tell so far. Next up, Midwest Indigo. Now this is one which really has grown on me over time. I believe, although I may be misremembering this, that when I did that initial review of Clancy, Midwest Indigo was one which I held to be my least favorite, or one of my least favorites on the album. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, obviously. It's only in a B. But it is one which I really enjoy listening to. I think the melody of that song and the tempo and the beat and all of that have really grown on me in a way I didn't expect. At first, I thought it sounded kind of just like a typical pop rock song. And melodically speaking, in many ways, it is similar to something like that. But the lyrics are actually deeper than I think they come across initially. And it has a really fun melody. And I enjoy listening to it. And I, for some reason, thought I was going to find it too boring or too bland. And that really has not been the case. So that was kind of a surprise and definitely something which has changed for me over this past year. Routines in the Night. I'm going to start off with this in S. Probably will move that down to A as we go along. It might surprise some people that I'm putting it above Overcompensate, and I might switch those around. They are quite close. But Routines in the Night was instantly one of my favorite songs the first time I heard it. Lyrically, I really like it. It may be one of my favorites. Probably not my favorite lyrically off the album. At least my second favorite. Musically, I also really like it. I'm surprised they didn't release it as a single initially. Obviously, it got some traction after the album came out, and they played it at a couple of talk shows and things like that, as well as, it was playing on the radio more and things along those lines. The melody of it is wonderful, especially that pre-chorus. That's just a great song overall, and the music video for it is really good as well. But obviously, that's not part of this ranking here, but that is something which I really enjoyed and appreciated about it. And is worth mentioning because the first time I heard the song, I was also watching the music video for it because it was part of the official release live stream that 21Pilots did the night Clancy came out, which was showcasing all of the music videos which they had made as well. So, Vignette. I like this one more than I think some people do. I'm going to put it in A for now. I might move Routines down into A as well. That might end up bumping Vignette. I don't know. I do like Routines better than Vignette, but I do really like Vignette. In many ways, perhaps it's the simplicity of it, the more, just a simpler beat, simpler sound to it than something like Routines in the Night or Overcompensate. It reminds me of some earlier 21Pilots stuff, perhaps something that would fit well on Blurryface or Trench. I think my biggest complaint with the song is that it takes a considerable amount of time to start and isn't a terribly long song. I think if it had an intro of the same length, but was a longer song than it is and made up for that proportionately, I would like it better, but it feels like the song takes a bit of time to actually start, and then it's a really short song once it does start. But other than that, I like the sound, like the lyricism. I think it's well done. The Craving, Jenna's version. I think I'm going to put this in D. And I think it's important to clarify, I do not dislike this song. In fact, I like it a lot. But because it is so stripped down and almost just entirely acoustic, it is less impressive to me than the others. And it's hard to say that it is better than any of these other songs, which at least feel like there was a lot more work put into them. Now, it's not to discredit just the songwriting process and ability that went into writing The Craving in the first place, obviously. But besides the fact that it's not the one that I listen to the most, although I always enjoy and appreciate it when I do hear it, it isn't one which kind of stands as an impressive, really well done song. And again, the melody is good, but it's not my favorite. Even just going off a melody alone, it would probably be quite low in that aspect also. I think there's also an aspect in which it feels a little out of place on Clancy, partly because it does seem so stripped down. Now I understand it comes right in the middle of the album, kind of shifts and slows the pace for a moment there. It gives you a break from the intensity of the rest of the album, and that's worth something. But I do think this would have fared better as kind of an alternate version of The Craving. And perhaps the single version of The Craving could have been reworked in such a way that it didn't sound so much like a single and fit better on the rest of Clancy alongside the rest of those songs. And then this version, Jenna's version, could exist as the alternate version released after, or maybe even just before, the rest of the album came out. Lavish, I'm also going to put in the D, above Jenna's version of The Craving. It again, in sound, feels kind of out of place on Clancy. Lyrically, it's not one of my favorites. Melodically, it's not one of my favorites. It's good. I appreciate it. I understand what they're going for with that, and I think that's good, and that's fair, and that's fine. Just not my cup of tea. And perhaps it was just a song that they wanted to write in order to have fun writing a song together. That's fine. And it's not bad. But it kind of, in my estimation, pales in comparison when taken in consideration alongside the rest of these songs. All right, Navigating. This will go up into the S tier. I think I'll put it just above Routines of the Night, which means I should move this down to the A tier. It is, at least right now, the song off of Clancy which I listen to the most, and therefore I believe it is my favorite. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the one which I think is the best. And even when considering the song that is the best, there is still a level of subjectivity which I am taking into consideration there. But the difference between my favorite and the song which I believe to be the best, even if I can't speak to an objectively best song off of this album, is that Navigating is the song which is my favorite right now and I listen to the most. But if there could only be one song off of Clancy, only one song to exist, and all the others had to be deleted forever, and no one could ever listen to them again, or I at least could never listen to them again, I don't know if Navigating is the one which I would keep. Because while I am a big fan of it right now, I acknowledge that I may grow tired of it over time. And there may be other songs on this album which are richer and have greater depth, both musically and lyrically, than Navigating does. Not that it lacks either of those, but just it may be lacking in comparison. All that is to say, I hesitate to consider it the best, but it is my favorite right now. Then we have Snapback. This one I feel like, at least for me, kind of gets forgotten sometimes. It seems like the companion piece to Backslide, and because it was released on the album and not as a single, and because it comes later on the track list than Backslide does, I think it seems to copy and repeat what Backslide is already doing. Now, obviously, it does say more in and of itself, and it isn't something that can't stand alone without Backslide, or vice versa. And I actually don't think it's fair to say that it does mimic, copy, or repeat Backslide. It plays along similar lines, and it deals in similar themes, but I think it is something in its own right, regardless, and it is saying something unique and different to Backslide in many ways. So I don't think it's fair to say that it should be sort of forgotten and lumped in as kind of the follow-up to Backslide rather than a song in and of itself. That said, I do think I like it a little bit less than Backslide, but I do really like it. I think it's a bit simpler and perhaps a bit blander than some of the other songs on the album, which I find that I like or appreciate more than Snapback. Oldie Station. I'm going to put that definitely in B. I think I'll put it... this is hard. Oldie Station and Next Semester are close for me. I like both of them for different reasons, and they're obviously very different songs. But I do really like Oldie Station. For now, I'll put it just above Next Semester, but they're kind of neck to neck for me. So it's a little hard to demonstrate that on a tier list like this. I think Oldie Station does what I wished The Craving could have done in terms of sound, right? It's a bit more laid back, a bit simpler, a bit more of a ukulele song. But it does it really well. It has simple but nice and well-made production. And it doesn't sound as empty and just completely stripped back as Jenna's version of The Craving does. And I think if that version of The Craving had been more along the lines of what they did with Oldie Station, I think it would have fit on Clancy better. Now, I'm not saying they should have copied Oldie Station, used those same melodies, or even used the same sounds or anything, just playing different notes. But I think that style, using that as an example, might have made me appreciate Jenna's version of The Craving more. All right, we are coming to the end of walking through this album with At the Risk of Feeling Dumb. This one was instantly one of my favorites off the album. And as time has gone on, I have listened to it less than I did in the first few weeks after Clancy was released, but I think it will always be one of my favorites. The sound is wonderful. The production is incredible. It's very well done. Every time you listen to it, you hear some new sound playing somewhere in the background, coming in one of your ears or the other. There's so much going on in the song. It's produced so well. It all flows together very, very nicely. I think they mentioned when they released all of these in that live stream that there were something like 25 different versions of the song in the end that they worked on with Paul Meany. So it was worth it. It paid off in the end. Yeah, it's incredible. I think in some ways I might have gone in a different direction. I might not have made certain parts of it as heavy as they are. I think it works in the end better than not doing that. But I'm personally not as much of a fan of like the distorted guitar coming in and things like that. But again, if it all was purely just kind of the same style, it wouldn't necessarily feel like a 21 Pilots song, and it also, I think, would get boring as well. And so they managed to not let that happen. And lyrically, it's great. It has a great message. So that helps as well. I think I'll put it above Vignette and not quite above Overcompensate. All right, finally, the last song on the album, Paladin Strait. And for this one, I think I'm going to have to rearrange some things a little bit. Move Vignette down to B. Move the single version of The Craving down to C. Move Navigating to the top of A above Routines in the Night. And with that, slip Paladin Strait into the S tier. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about navigating that there's a difference between my favorite song to listen to right now and the song which I consider to be the best song off of this album. And I think I can say that Paladin Strait is the song which I believe to be the best song on Clancy. Musically, it's incredible. It's very well done. It's very long, and it's sort of somber, but it's very well done. It's beautifully sung. It's beautifully written. The lyrics are incredible. And of course, the twist at the end and all of that is great as well. But even taken aside from that, even if you cut that part out, it is a fantastic piece of music. And one of the best songs I think they've written ever. If you're hearing me say that and you think that's a crazy take, it might help you to understand that Bandito is one of the songs which I think is one of their best songs also. It's certainly one of the best songs off of Trench. I think there's something about not just a slower song, but a very beautifully, hauntingly beautiful, slower song written by Tyler Joseph that it's really hard to beat. Bandito does it very well, and Paladin Strait follows in that same kind of style, but potentially even surpasses it. It's very different, right, lyrically and thematically to Bandito, but it is similarly incredible. And often songs like Bandito and Paladin Strait get overlooked. Obviously, Paladin Strait has been significant because of how it ended and the music video which accompanied it. But Bandito often doesn't really get the praise and recognition which I believe it deserves, or the discussion which should be surrounding it, because there's a lot to unpack there lyrically, and it's also just a great song to listen to as well. So I'm really hoping on Breach they have a song which follows in that vein. The closest thing that they had on Skilled and Icy was Redecorate, and that is one of my favorites off of Skilled and Icy as well. But even that one didn't quite do what Bandito or Paladin Strait does. I think it's also something about, Tyler having the inspiration and having such a deep and thorough song to work on and write and work through that it becomes a really long song. Bandito and Paladin Strait are some of the longest songs which they have published. And they're not unnecessarily long. They are necessarily long. And I think that speaks to how profound those songs are. But now, having gone through and ranked all of these songs according to my preference a year out from the album, Paladin Strait sits at the top, followed closely by Navigating, Routines in the Night, Overcompensate, and At the Risk of Feeling Dumb. And I think I'm very happy with those as the top 5. These other ones I might reorder slightly, but I think, generally speaking, those are some very fair placements. The album Clancy contains a number of wonderful songs, very well written, produced, and performed. But it is not enough to take these songs and look at them and consider them holistically. I think it is also worthwhile to examine the songs more closely, to look more specifically at individual lines, not just whole verses, but lines and phrases within those verses, which are either significant or important for one reason or another. The first of these that I wanted to look at are these lyrics from the first song on the album, Overcompensate. These lyrics are contained in the first verse, and they read as follows. I feel like I was just here, same twitching in my eyes. Don't sleep on a boy who can't fall asleep twice in the same night. Now, in many ways, these lyrics are reminiscent of lyrics that we might have seen in something like No Fun Intended, especially this idea of sleeplessness. Obviously, the imagery of the eyes is important, and we can return to that in a moment, but this element of sleeplessness is something which has always fascinated me throughout their songs. Again, like I mentioned, it's something which shows up quite a bit in No Fun Intended. There's obviously a song taken by sleep, but even songs like Hear Me Now, with that lyric, I go to sleep every night, I should be good at it by now, which is one of my favorite lines off of that album. There's this idea that as someone who perhaps struggles with insomnia, there's a sort of other world which he inhabits. And you see this again in Routines in the Night. This idea that there's this world which he inhabits and which he occupies and walks in, that's a very lonely world, right? Everyone around is asleep, and he was asleep. But now that he's woken up, he can't fall asleep again. And so he spends this time perhaps lying in his bed, staring up at his ceiling and the ceiling fan above him, creating worlds out of that sleeplessness. And from that, we get the world, or the city of Dima, and then eventually the world of Trench. Now, how does that all connect to Overcompensate? Well, it all connects, broadly speaking, of course. But it's sort of been a subtle theory of mine, perhaps even a subconscious theory of mine that I haven't really quite fleshed out, that the world of Dima is a world which he occupies at night. And so this line that begins this segment, I feel like I was just here, same twitching in my eyes. The twitching eyes of sleeplessness, right? Tired, foggy eyes. twitching uncontrollably as he tries to stay awake and yet can't find rest in sleep, are a sign and a signal of the fact that he has entered this sleepless world again, right? He was just here, feels like he was just here in Dima, and now he's back, right? It's a new night, as it were. Perhaps all of that is completely ungrounded, and I'm reading something into these songs that really isn't there. But I think in many ways it does make a lot of sense, and this lyric always stuck out to me in Overcompensate because of that, and just in terms of how it's written, the rhythm of it, the lyricism, all of that. It is one of my favorite lines from the song. The next song I wanted to look at was the song Backslide. And there's this interesting line here at the end of the second verse, which reads, "I used to be the champion of a world you can't see. Now I'm drowning in logistics." Some people, when the song first came out, given the name of the song, speculated that this was referring to, or a hint, a clue, that Clancy was going to become a bishop, or that he had formerly been a bishop, right? This ties into the idea that Clancy and Blurryface, even in the world of Dima, are the same person. And so he used to rule the world, as Blurryface does, rule this world of Dima, and Trench, more in a sense, although strictly speaking, it seems like Blurryface is simply just the ruler of that one city, not Trench as a whole. But they do have power and authority outside Dima, obviously. They can go into Trench and bring people back, so they do rule Trench in a sense. So the idea that he used to be occupying the position that Blurryface did, but he doesn't want to backslide into Blurryface, right? He doesn't want to take on that face and that name again. And so now he's drowning in the logistics of trying to get away from that. That is one potential theory, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But another way that we can look at this is the idea that Tyler, or Clancy, was the champion of the world of Trench, broadly speaking, not Dima. He was the symbol of hope and the symbol of rebellion for the Banditos. He was their champion. And then at the end of Paladin Street, he kind of breaches that trust. He betrays it, and he becomes a ruler in his own right, wielding absolute power over the citizens, as we saw in his most recent letter. And so he was a champion, and now he's just drowning in the logistics of leadership. And it's a leadership which those who used to uphold him as a champion now resent him for his rule. Regardless, I thought it was interesting to look at this line now, taken in the context of the upcoming album, and even before that announcement came out, in the context of the letters which we've seen from the Banditos and from the Torchbearer to Clancy, and then, of course, from Clancy himself. Next up, let's take a look at the lyrics from one of my favorite songs, Routines in the Night. These are the lyrics which open the song. "Walk the layout, routines in the night. Some doors have stay out spray-painted in white. While all the world's asleep, I walk around instead, through the memories, down the halls of my head." Now, these lyrics really speak to what I was talking about with those lines that we saw in Overcompensate. This idea that Clancy sort of rules a sleepless world, a sleepless, solitary world, while everyone around him sleeps. He has routines that he walks through in the night. But what does that mean? What are those routines? Well, routines are something that you repeat quite a lot, right? That's why they're a routine. They're a habit built through repetition. And so arguably, you could say that they're a repetitive cycle. Now, you can make a semantic distinction between cycles and habits, and I understand that. But I think it's also worth considering the possibility that connected to, again, what I was just talking about with Backslide and Overcompensate, that these lyrics indicate a repeating cycle every night, or at least every sleepless night, as he walks through the map in his head, a sort of world in his head that he's indicating, that he's talking about, that he's referencing. And there are places within his head that he would rather not go. He's marked them with an indicator that he'll stay away, stay out. But especially when coupled with the imagery of the music video which accompanied this song, it really lends itself to the idea that The entirety of the story, the entirety of the world of Dima, is something which exists inside Clancy's head, and perhaps even could be considered to be a thought experiment which he is conducting. And I've referenced this a number of times in various other theories that are proposed, so that's not important to really delve deeply into here for the purposes of what this video is. But I still think it's interesting. I think these lyrics and some other lyrics in Routines in the Night don't really get the attention that they should, because they're important, they're significant. And even just in these few lines, there's a lot to unpack and break down. For instance, what are the memories that he walks through? Where do the halls in his head lead? What do the rooms really open up to? Does each room contain a distinct and separate memory? Perhaps. Next up is the song which followed Routines in the Night, Vignette. And the chorus goes as follows. Clinging to promises, fighting off the vignette. Tunnels cave, visions fade, swallowed by the vignette. And obviously a vignette is a circle of darkness which surrounds the image or the person within. And again, in some ways, looking at this a year out from the release of the album, and knowing what we know now, having read and seen the letters that we've read and seen, and given the name of the new album, everything, or perhaps not everything, but a lot seems to point to the idea that Clancy's either going to become a bishop in his own right, or is very strongly tempted to do so. Tempted to the point that he is struggling to not succumb to that temptation. And if succumbing to that temptation would mean being defeated, ultimately, then he's kind of balancing on the edge of a precipice. And this chorus really speaks to that. Clinging to promises, fighting off the vignette, clinging to the promises that he made, the contract that he made to the torchbearer and to his followers, the banditos. The importance, as the torchbearer pointed out, of remembering where he came from and what it is that he is fighting for as he fights off the darkness, which seeks to overpower and control him. But the tunnels cave and the visions of his past, those memories of where he came from, fade away, and he's swallowed by the vignette and controlled, therefore, by it. Now, the fact that this chorus says that doesn't necessarily mean that that is what is going to happen in the story, but it certainly is a fear which he is wrestling with, and I think perhaps is a fear which we can see him wrestling with as he fights and struggles with Nico in the tower at the end of Paladin Strait. And this, again, is another reason, this coupled with Routines in the Night, and even Backslide, is another reason why I think Clancy is more, and I've held this position for a while, ever since the album first came out, is more filled with the lore than it appears to be on the surface. And it's filled with lore in a similar fashion to how Blurryface was, right? Blurryface was a character study of the character Blurryface. Clancy is a character study of the character Clancy. But through that process, through examining and writing songs to examine the character of Clancy, you are necessarily delving into and exploring key elements of the lore, because he is a very key character within the lore. So a song like this is actually quite filled with lore. It's not the sort of narrative weaving storytelling songs that we got in Trench, and I certainly understand the desire for more songs like those because they're very cool. And perhaps we'll get some more in Breach. It's hard to say exactly what that album is going to entail right now. But even putting that aside, putting the future or the past albums aside, yes, the songs in Clancy don't explicitly name drop members or characters in the lore or events or places in the lore, but the themes really tie into what Clancy is struggling with, what he struggles with as an individual, and kind of the tragedy of his character. He becomes this champion for the Banditos, but we don't know if he really wanted to. He's given a power by Ned and his compatriots on the island of Voltsoy, a power which he can use to defeat the bishops of Dima, but a power which is also quite sinister and dark in and of itself, is a power which must have a cost and a toll to wield. And we don't know if he wanted that power. He's grateful to have it because it's a means by which he can defeat the bishops and give his friends and followers hope once more. In many ways, it seems that a character who struggles so fundamentally with a desire for control, as we see throughout Blurryface, is thrust into a position in which he is upheld as a leader, and as a result of that is put in a position where absolute power comes within his grasp. The thing which he struggles to control his desire for is placed right in front of him. And so even if Clancy does become a bishop in his own right, if he ends up betraying the Banditos, or at least attempting to, I think ultimately this is a discussion for a different video because it's getting more into what we can expect from Breach. I think ultimately the story isn't going to end on a note of despair, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a moment where Clancy either is inclined to or does betray Banditos and the Torchbearer. But even if he does, he's still a sympathetic character, because the thing which he struggled with the most, right? Blurryface is the character and the bishop who represents an insecurity of his strongest insecurity, the one he struggles with the most, the desire for control. And that is thrust in front of him. Absolute power is placed right in front of him. He has been tempted by control in the past, but perhaps never so fully as he is about to be, or as fully as he is once he is made leader of the Banditos, and given such a powerful weapon as the weapons of seizing. But moving on from Vignette and skipping over a couple of songs in the middle, we get to Navigating. The chorus goes as follows. Pardon my delay. I'm navigating my head. Disassociate. Again, we see this theme which has been playing throughout, which I first indicated in Overcompensate, which appears most explicitly in Routines in the Night, but is even referenced here in Navigating. This idea that this is all something which is going on inside Clancy's or Tyler's head, right? He's disassociating into the characters of Clancy and Blurryface, and so on. And perhaps even into the character of the Torchbearer. In the music video for Navigating, that is where we see that he's sort of been seeing the Torchbearer beside him when he's not there. Now, this could be a result of a power the Torchbearer has to kind of exist in multiple places at once. But again, as I mentioned in a different video, that music video then goes on to show us Clancy alone, with the Torchbearer having never been there, only just a figment in his imagination. All that is to say, I think it is interesting and important to note this theme of disassociation within his head, and how that isn't, for the purposes of this, necessarily a bad thing, right? That was the whole purpose behind Blurryface. It went wrong, but that doesn't mean the theory behind it was necessarily fundamentally flawed. It just got out of his control. But the idea that you can separate out different parts of your mind and examine them at an arm's length to better understand them is an interesting idea, and it, again, isn't necessarily a flawed idea, and I think it is sort of a fundamental idea underlying this story, even if it's not one which exists within the story itself. Next up is the song Snapback. In the first verse, we hear the following. Have I burnt all the bridges? Bite the hand that helps me, give it finger stitches. Blacklisted from forgiveness. These lines are probably my favorite from this song, and some of my favorite lines in the album as a whole. Not necessarily because there's some really clear way in which they tie into the lore, although I'm sure there is, but what stands out to me more is just the lyricism of it. This idea that whether intentionally or not, you reject a helping hand and in fact turn on it instead. And then whether because of that or as a cause of that, you are blacklisted from forgiveness. What do I mean by as a cause of that? Well, perhaps you could reject help from someone who offers it to you. You consider yourself to be blacklisted from receiving their forgiveness. And so you reject their offers of help. And similar to Backslide, this is sort of a song which we could see taking place in a moment at which he is struggling with becoming a bishop, or the temptation to become a bishop, to wield absolute power. This idea that he has turned away from people like the Torchbearer. The Torchbearer, really, all he ever does throughout the story is offer him help. From the first moment we saw him in Jumpsuit, and throughout the Trench trilogy. But Clancy seems to be turning away from him now, whether because he resents him resents the way he is trying to help him, resents the reminder the torchbearer offers him of where he came from and the fact that he must do better than the bishops, must not succumb to wielding absolute power for his own ends. And the idea that now, having turned away from the torchbearer, he has burnt his bridge with him, and when he needs his help later, he won't receive it. Oldie Station is not a song which I really see fitting into the lore. I mentioned earlier that this album is one which I see to contain way more references and significance to the lore than people give it credit for, or at least initially thought. And I still believe that's the case, but I don't think Oldie Station really fits into that category. I also don't think The Craving or Lavish do either. Although, to be fair, there is that one line in Lavish which I think contains very significant meaning in terms of the lore. In fact, I think it holds the key to understanding exactly where the story has gone and where it is going to go next. But back to Oldie Station. We see here in the chorus these lines. Make an oath, then make mistakes. Start a streak you are bound to break. When darkness rolls on you, push on through. The song as a whole is one which I see to be the most hopeful and uplifting song 21 Pilots has ever made. But what I like about the song is that it's not an uplifting song which is full of empty platitudes. I think even if it were full of platitudes at all, which it isn't really, they wouldn't be empty because they come in the context of everything else which Tyler has written, many of which are not exactly hopeful songs. Although I do think a message of hope underpins everything which they create, I think you look at some of their songs and you can't exactly see how they're uplifting per se, right? They're quite dark, some of them, especially when you really get down to the core of what the song is saying. But that doesn't mean the songs which are dark are necessarily pessimistic, right? But this is a song which is quite clearly optimistic and hopeful, but thoughtfully hopeful, right? There's this idea, this acknowledgement that you will fail, you will make mistakes, you will break oaths which you have given. And that is a serious thing, and that's not something to be taken lightly, and that's not something to be brushed off as just a simple mistake that you need to now look past. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make an effort, make those oaths in the first place, and seek to keep them again even after having broken them. The whole idea of this cycle of Clancy trying to escape Dima over and over again, it gets to a point where he thinks he cannot succeed because he hasn't succeeded. But he keeps trying. He keeps starting the streak that he knows he's bound to break because one time he might not break it. He may complete it. He may push on through and achieve the goal in the end, which he's been striving for all along. And the reason that I say, even though you can see how this would fit into the story, but the reason I say that this isn't one which I see as being very vital to the story of Dima is because it's one which is just very significant for life in general. And then finally, the final song on Clancy, Paladin Strait. The bridge contains some of my favorite lines on the song, and goes as follows. Here's my chance, time to take it. Can't be sure that I'll make it even though I'm past the point of no return. I'm all in, I'm surrounded. Put my money where my mouth is, even though I'm past the point of no return. I mentioned earlier that there is a tragedy at the heart of Clancy's story, and perhaps the way that this will ultimately manifest itself, as some have speculated in the past, is that Clancy will sacrifice himself. Now, I think, broadly speaking, the way people imagine this will happen is that Clancy will die in order that others might live. But perhaps it's not quite that simple. Perhaps Clancy must succumb to the temptation of control in order to create a diversion. There isn't much that I have to add to these lyrics that isn't quite obvious on the surface. But nonetheless, they are some of my favorite lyrics. I think they're important, they're significant. Obviously, we see this kind of played out in the video itself. But nonetheless, I thought they would be worth mentioning. Again, like I said, not necessarily because I have a whole lot to add that everyone isn't already aware of. These lyrics are pretty clear on the face of it, what they're talking about. But they are very significant lyrics and very well written, especially in the context of the song Paladin Strait. And that concludes a brief look through some of the key and significant lyrics in the album Clancy. As we come to the end of our time together, I'd like to thank you for tuning in and sticking all the way through to the end of this video. It was quite a long one, but hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you have enjoyed this past year of the Clancy era as much as I have. It certainly has been a great year, and a great era not only for music and videos and all sorts of new releases, but also for all sorts of cool and interesting theories which have been circulating surrounding this story. As we go through and get new albums and new eras, and the story continues to build and add upon itself, it becomes more and more clear how deep, thought out, and thorough and expansive this story is. So it certainly is wonderful to be able to thoughtfully consider all the different elements and aspects of the story, while at the same time recognizing that there is so much more to unpack. I very much look forward to seeing what will be coming next from 21 Pilots, to hearing the new single in June, and then, of course, the album Breach in September, and I'm sure that there will be plenty more to look at, discuss, and theorize about in this coming year. With that being said, thank you for joining me to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of Clancy. Let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was from this past year, whether it's a song or a video, and as always, don't forget to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews. Before we go, let me leave you with this passage from one of Clancy's letters. I found a way in, a way they'll never suspect, and a way they'll never understand. Everything about our cause is so hard for them to understand, but so close to the hearts of the growing resistance. I can reach them all. I can recruit everyone with eyes that see beyond the horizon. I can teach them. They can learn what I've learned and fly by all of the constructs that Dima has placed in front of them. I can give them hope. I will be their example of absolute power. We will take it